The red sun of Kepler 442b cast long shadows across the refugee settlement as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison checked his weapon one final time. The morning patrol would be routine, just like the dozens before it over the past 3 months. The peacekeeping mission had been going smoothly, with both warring alien species maintaining their ceasefire under the watchful eyes of the Galactic Federation forces. Jake looked over at his daughter Emma, who sat on a supply crate nearby, swinging her legs back and forth. At 8 years old, she had adapted to life on the alien world better than most adults. The cultural exchange program had been the Federation's idea, bringing family members to show the human approach to peacekeeping. Emma had become a favorite among the refugee children, her laughter echoing through the settlement each day. "Ready for another adventure, kiddo?" Jake asked, adjusting his helmet. Emma jumped down from the crate, her small backpack bouncing. "Can I play with the Zephyrian kids again today? They promised to show me their singing stones." Jake smiled. The Zephyrian children had taken Emma under their wing, teaching her their games and customs. It was exactly what the Federation had hoped for when they started the cultural exchange program. "Sure, but stay close to the patrol route. And remember the rules." "I know, Dad. Don't wander off. Don't touch anything glowing, and if I see anything weird, find you right away." Sergeant Maria Santos walked over, her rifle slung across her shoulder. "The Zephyrian sector is quiet today. Their families are gathering water from the new wells we helped them dig. Should be a peaceful morning." Jake nodded. The human contingent had worked hard to improve conditions in the refugee camps. While other Federation species focused on maintaining order through force, the humans had chosen a different approach. They fixed broken equipment, helped distribute food, and treated the refugees as people rather than problems to be managed. The patrol began like any other. Jake led his team of 6 soldiers through the winding paths between the temporary shelters. The Zephyrian refugees watched them pass with friendly waves and grateful nods. Children ran alongside the patrol, chattering in their musical language. Emma had quickly found her friends among the young Zephyrians. She ran ahead, her blonde hair bright against the alien landscape. The refugee children welcomed her with excited whistles and clicks, their version of laughter. Jake watched from a distance, proud of how naturally his daughter connected with beings from another world. The settlement bustled with morning activity. Zephyrian families prepared their simple meals while adults discussed the day's tasks. The camp had grown more organized under human guidance, with proper sanitation systems and orderly distribution of supplies. Other Federation species had been impressed by the results. Though some seemed less pleased by the human success, Commander Vexthal was one of those who disapproved. The tall Zephyrian officer stood nearly 9 feet tall, his armored exoskeleton gleaming in the morning light. His rank insignia marked him as a high-ranking Federation official sent to oversee the peacekeeping operation. Unlike the refugees, Vexthal belonged to the warrior caste of his species. Bred for combat and command. Jake had dealt with Vexthal before. The alien commander made no secret of his belief that humans were primitive and soft. He viewed their compassionate approach to peacekeeping as weakness, preferring the traditional Federation method of rule through intimidation. The two had clashed several times over treatment of the refugees. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison," Vexthal's voice carried the usual tone of condescension. "Your offspring runs free among the displaced ones again." Jake kept his expression neutral. "Emma is part of the cultural exchange program, Commander. Her presence helps build trust with the civilian population. Trust is unnecessary, order is what matters." Vexthal's 4 eyes fixed on where Emma played with the Zephyrian children. "These primitives must learn their place in the Federation hierarchy." "They're refugees, not primitives," Jake replied. "And they're under our protection." Vexthal's mandibles clicked in what Jake had learned was equivalent to a dismissive snort. "Protection. You humans coddle weakness. It will be your downfall." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of running children. Emma had started a game of tag with her Zephyrian friends, their laughter mixing with the alien children's musical calls. They raced between the shelters, dodging around adults and supply containers. Jake smiled, despite the tension with Vexthel. Emma's joy was infectious, and even some of the serious-faced Federation soldiers had started smiling when she was around. The refugee children had been traumatized by the war, but Emma's presence had helped them remember how to play. The children's game brought them closer to where the adults stood. Emma was running full speed, looking back over her shoulder at the Zephyrian child chasing her. She didn't see Vexthel until it was too late. The collision happened in an instant. Emma, looking backward while running, slammed into Vexthel's armored leg. The impact sent her stumbling sideways, but she quickly regained her balance with a breathless laugh. "Sorry, Commander," she said, looking up at the towering alien. "I didn't see you there." What happened next changed everything. Vexthel's armored hand swung down in a vicious backhand strike. The blow caught Emma across the face, sending her small body flying backward. She hit the ground hard, her head striking a metal supply container. With a sickening thud. For a moment, time seemed frozen. Emma lay motionless on the ground, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. The Zephyrian children scattered in terror, their musical voices now shrill with fear. Jake felt something snap. Inside him, the world narrowed to a single focus as he saw his daughter lying injured on the alien ground. His hand moved instinctively to his weapon, but Maria's grip on his arm stopped him. "Sir, don't," she whispered urgently. "Not here, not now." The other human soldiers had moved closer, their faces dark with anger. Jake could see the same protective rage in their eyes that burned in his own chest. But discipline held them back, barely. Vexthel stood over Emma's prone form, showing no concern for what he had done. The primitive should have watched where it was going, he said coldly. Perhaps this will teach it proper respect for its betters. Jake knelt beside his daughter, his hands shaking as he checked her injuries. Emma's eyes fluttered open, confused and frightened. Blood stained her blonde hair, and a dark bruise was already forming on her cheek. "Daddy?" she whispered, her voice small and scared. "I'm here, baby. You're going to be okay." Jake's voice was steady despite the fury building inside him. He activated his CUM unit. Medical team to Sector 7. Priority 1. Around them, the refugee camp had gone silent. The Zephyrian families watched in horror as their protectors stood over the injured human child. They had come to love Emma, and seeing her hurt by one of their own species filled them with shame and anger. The human medic arrived within minutes, quickly stabilizing Emma's injuries. The cut would need stitches, and she likely had a concussion, but she would recover. Jake held her hand as the medic worked, his eyes never leaving Vexthel's face. "This incident will be reported," Jake said quietly. Vexthel's mandibles clicked again. "Report what you wish, human. The Federation will see only a minor disciplinary action against an unruly primitive." As the medic prepared to transport Emma to the medical facility, Jake looked around at the faces surrounding them. His own soldiers were barely containing their anger. The refugee families looked shocked and frightened. Even some of the other Federation species seemed uncomfortable with what they had witnessed. An 8-year-old human girl had been struck down by a Federation officer for the crime of being a child at play. Jake realized that this moment would be remembered long after the peacekeeping mission ended. The question was, what would come next? The emergency meeting convened 3 hours after Emma was struck. Jake sat in the medical facility beside his daughter's bed, watching her sleep while the Federation's top officials gathered in the main conference room. The cut on her forehead had required 12 stitches, and the doctors confirmed she had a mild concussion. But the physical wounds would heal much faster than what this incident had torn apart. Ambassador Helen Rodriguez arrived on the first shuttle from the Federation command ship. Jake had worked with her before and respected her dedication to Earth's interests. She was tough and smart, but she also understood the impossible position that diplomats often found themselves in when dealing with the Federation's complex politics. "How is she?" Helen asked quietly, looking down at Emma's sleeping form. "She recover," Jake replied. "The question is what happens next." Helen's expression was grim. "The Federation Council is calling it an unfortunate accident. They say Vexthel was simply maintaining order and didn't realize his own strength. Jake felt his jaw tighten. An accident? He deliberately struck an 8-year-old child for bumping into him? My entire team witnessed it. I know what happened, Jake, but the Zephyrian delegation is backing their officer. They claim Emma was being disruptive and that Vexthel used appropriate force to restore discipline. Appropriate force? Jake's voice rose slightly, then he caught himself and glanced at his sleeping daughter. He could have killed her. Helen pulled up a chair beside Jake's. I've been in contact with Earth Command. They're furious about this, but they're also concerned about the bigger picture. If we push too hard, the Zephyrians might withdraw from the peacekeeping mission entirely. And that would be a bad thing? Jake, you know the situation here. Without the Federation presence, this planet goes back to war. Millions of refugees would be caught in the crossfire. The Zephyrians provide most of our military support for this operation. Jake looked at his daughter's bandaged face. Emma stirred slightly in her sleep, and he gently touched her hand. So we're supposed to just accept this? Let them get away with attacking a child? I'm going to file a formal complaint with the Federation Council, Helen said. But I need you to understand that the response may not be what you're hoping for. The formal complaint was filed within 6 hours. The Federation Council reviewed it with what they called appropriate speed and thoroughness. The response came back 12 hours later. Commander Vexthel would receive a verbal reprimand for excessive enthusiasm in maintaining order. No other action would be taken. Jake read the official response 3 times before the full meaning sank in. A verbal reprimand for nearly killing a child. He crumpled the paper and threw it across the room, waking Emma in the process. Daddy? She said grudgingly. Why are you angry? Jake forced himself to calm down. I'm not angry at you, sweetheart. How are you feeling? My head hurts. And I'm scared of the tall alien man. Jake felt something break inside his chest. Emma had never been afraid of aliens before. She had played with refugee children from a dozen different species, treating them all as friends. Now fear had entered her young mind because of one brutal act. You don't have to be scared anymore, he told her. Daddy won't let anything happen to you. But even as he said the words, Jake knew they weren't entirely true. The Federation had made it clear that they considered the matter closed. Vexthel would continue serving as a commander with full authority over the peacekeeping mission. Emma would have to see him again, and there was nothing Jake could do about it. News of the incident spread through the refugee camps like wildfire. The Zephyrian families were ashamed that one of their own species had hurt the human child who had brought so much joy to their children. They began approaching the human soldiers with expressions of sorrow and anger. We are not all like him, an elderly Zephyrian woman told Jake through a translator. The child Emma is precious to us. What was done to her brings dishonor to our people. Similar conversations happened throughout the day. The refugee families had grown to love Emma during her time in the camps. She had learned their songs, played their games, and treated their children as equals. To see her hurt by a member of their own species filled them with rage. The other Federation species had mixed reactions. Some quietly expressed sympathy for what had happened, but most seemed uncomfortable with the attention the incident was receiving. They preferred to maintain the status quo rather than challenge the power structure that kept the Federation functioning. Sergeant Maria Santos brought Jake the daily patrol reports, but her mind was clearly elsewhere. The men are asking questions, sir. They want to know what we're going to do about this. What do you mean? The whole team saw what happened. They're angry, and they're looking to you for leadership. Some of them are talking about taking matters into their own hands. Jake rubbed his temples. The last thing he needed was his soldiers doing something that would make the situation worse. Tell them to stand down. We handle this through proper channels. With respect, sir, the proper channels just gave that monster a slap on the wrist. The men don't think that's justice for what he did to Emma. The men need to follow orders and let me handle this. Maria hesitated before speaking again. Sir, what if the orders are wrong? The question hung in the air between them. Jake had been asking himself the same thing since the Federation's response arrived. He had spent his entire career following orders and believing in the system. But the system had failed his daughter, and now he wasn't sure what to believe anymore. Emma was cleared to leave the medical facility the next morning. Jake carried her back to their quarters, noting how she pressed closer to him whenever they passed other aliens. The fearless little girl who had run laughing through the refugee camps was gone, replaced by a child who now saw potential threats everywhere. "When can we go home, Daddy?" she asked as he tucked her into bed. "The mission isn't over yet, sweetheart. We have a few more months here. I don't want to see the mean alien man again." Jake's heart ached. "I'll do everything I can to make sure you don't have to." But even as he made the promise, Jake knew it was probably impossible to keep. The peacekeeping mission required cooperation between all Federation species. Vexthel would continue his duties, and Emma would have to live in the same place as the being who had hurt her. That night, Jake lay awake thinking about Maria's question. What if the orders were wrong? What if the system that he had served faithfully for 15 years was fundamentally flawed? What if protecting his daughter meant going against everything he had been taught about duty and chain of command? The questions troubled him more than he wanted to admit. Jake had always believed that following orders and working within the system was the right thing to do. But watching Emma sleep with a bandaged face made him wonder if there came a time when a father's duty to his child outweighed his duty to his superiors. In the refugee camps, similar questions were being asked. The Zephyrian families gathered in small groups, speaking in hushed tones about what they had witnessed. They had seen the human soldiers' anger and recognized it as the same protective rage they would feel if their own children were threatened. The incident had created something unexpected. For the first time since the peacekeeping mission began, the refugees and the human soldiers were united by a common cause. They had all been failed by the Federation's justice system, and they were all looking for someone to show them a different way forward. Jake didn't know it yet, but his decision about what to do next would determine not just Emma's future, but the future of everyone on Kepler 442b. The Federation had made their position clear, but the question remained whether Jake would accept it or choose to fight for something better. Jake made his decision on the third day after Emma's attack. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat properly, and couldn't look at his daughter's healing face without feeling the rage build inside him again. The Federation had made their position clear, but Jake refused to accept that justice was impossible. "I need you to do something for me," he told Maria during their morning briefing. "Something that might get us all in trouble." Maria looked at him carefully. "What kind of trouble, sir?" "I want to know everything about Commander Vexthel. His service record, his previous assignments, any complaints filed against him, everything." "Sir, that information is classified. We'd need authorization from Federation Command to access those files." "Then we don't ask for authorization." Maria was quiet for a long moment. "Are you ordering me to hack Federation databases?" "I'm asking you to help me find the truth. What you do with that request is up to you." Maria stood up and moved toward the door. For a moment, Jake thought she was going to refuse. Then she stopped and turned back. "Give me 48 hours. The next 2 days passed slowly. Jake tried to maintain normal routines while Emma recovered, but everything felt different now. The refugee children still waved when they saw him, but their parents watched with worried eyes. The other Federation officers avoided him entirely, as if his anger might be contagious. Emma was healing physically, but the emotional damage was harder to assess. She no longer asked to play with the Zephyrian children, and she stayed close to Jake whenever they left their quarters. The fearless little girl who had run laughing through alien settlements was gone, replaced by someone who jumped at unexpected sounds and scanned every room for threats. "Daddy, why did the alien man hurt me?" she asked one evening as Jake tucked her into bed. Jake had been dreading this question. Some people think that being bigger and stronger gives them the right to hurt others, but they're wrong. "Will you make sure he can't hurt anyone else?" "I'm trying, sweetheart, I'm trying." Maria returned with the information Jake had requested. She looked tired and worried as she handed him a datapad loaded with files. "This stays between us," she said. "If anyone asks, you never saw these files?" Jake began reading immediately. What he found made his blood run cold. Commander Vexthal had a long history of violence against civilian populations. During the Kaleri Uprising, he had been accused of executing prisoners without trial. On the mining world of Proxima Delta, he had been investigated for using excessive force against striking workers. In each case, the Federation had either dismissed the charges or transferred him to a new assignment. "There are more," Maria said quietly. "Complaints from other species, reports of brutality, even some allegations of torture. The Federation has been covering for years." Jake felt sick as he read through the reports. Vexthal wasn't just a rigid officer with poor judgment. He was a predator who used his position and authority to hurt those who couldn't fight back. Emma had been just his latest victim. "Why hasn't anyone stopped him?" Jake asked. "He's politically connected. His family holds important positions in the Zephyrian government. Plus, he's effective at maintaining order through fear. The Federation tolerates his methods because they get results." Jake closed the datapad and looked at Maria. What would happen if this information became public? It would be a scandal. The Federation has been protecting a war criminal for decades. "But sir, if we leak this information, they'll know it came from us. We'd face court-martial at minimum, and if we do nothing, then Emma's attack gets forgotten and Vexthal continues hurting people until someone finally stops him." Jake thought about Emma's question from the night before. "Will you make sure he can't hurt anyone else?" He had promised to try, but trying wasn't enough anymore. "I need to think about this," he told Maria. "But I want you to make copies of everything. If something happens to me, I want this information to survive." That night, Jake made another decision that would change everything. He began sharing the information with the refugee families. It started with the elderly Zephyrian woman who had apologized for her species actions. Jake showed her the files documenting Vexthal's crimes against her people during the Kaleri Uprising. Her reaction was immediate and visceral. "This monster killed my brother," she said through the translator, her voice shaking with rage. We're told he died in combat, but this says he was executed after surrendering." Word spread through the refugee camps like wildfire. Families who had lost loved ones during various conflicts began recognizing Vexthal's name from the reports. The Zephyrian refugees were especially horrified to learn that one of their own species had been committing atrocities for decades while the Federation protected him. "He is not one of us," the elderly woman told Jake the next day. "He has brought shame to our entire species. We will not let him hurt another child." The refugee families began organizing among themselves. They shared stories of lost family members and compared them to the incidents documented in Vexthal's files. A pattern emerged of systematic brutality that had been hidden from the general population. Other species in the refugee camps joined the growing movement. The Kaleri families who had survived Vexthal's peacekeeping operations, the Proxima Delta miners who had lost friends to his violence, and dozens of other victims who had never been allowed to tell their stories. Jake found himself at the center of something much larger than he had intended. What had started as a search for justice for Emma had become a movement to expose the Federation's systemic failure to protect its most vulnerable members. "Sir, Federation Command is asking questions," Maria reported during their evening briefing. "They know something is happening in the camps, but they're not sure what." "What kind of questions?" "They want to know why the refugees are so agitated. There have been reports of unauthorized gatherings and inflammatory discussions about Federation policies." Jake felt a chill of fear. If the Federation realized what was happening, they would shut down the information sharing immediately. Worse, they might retaliate against the refugee families who were finally finding their voices. "We need to be more careful," he told Maria. "But we can't stop now. Too many people are counting on us to see this through." Emma was getting stronger each day, but she was also becoming more aware of the tension around her. She noticed the way the refugee families looked at her with a mixture of sympathy and determination. She saw how her father's jaw tightened whenever certain topics came up in conversation. "Are you fighting the bad man, Daddy?" she asked one evening. Jake looked at his daughter's serious face and realized She understood more than he had given her credit for. I'm trying to make sure he can't hurt anyone else. Good, Emma said firmly. Someone should stop him. The next morning brought news that would force Jake to make his most difficult decision yet. Commander Vexthal had been assigned to conduct a security inspection of the refugee camps. He would be visiting every sector, questioning families about their activities and looking for signs of unrest. Jake realized that Vexthal's inspection was really a hunt. The Federation suspected that someone was stirring up trouble among the refugees, and they were sending their most brutal enforcer to find and stop them. He's looking for you, Maria said quietly. If he finds evidence that you've been sharing classified information, he'll have you arrested. Jake looked across the camp toward the medical facility where Emma was having her stitches removed. His daughter was finally healing, but now she might have to face the being who had hurt her all over again. Let him come, Jake said. I'm not hiding anymore. The confrontation that had been building since Emma's attack was finally approaching. Jake had found the truth about Vexthal's crimes, shared it with the victims' families, and helped them organize their growing movement for justice. Now he had to decide whether he was willing to risk everything to protect what they had built together. Commander Vexthal arrived at the refugee camps with a full security detail at dawn. His armored form cast long shadows as he walked through the settlement, his 4 eyes scanning for signs of the unrest that Federation Command had reported. The refugee families watched him pass with barely concealed hatred, but they remained silent. Jake stood outside the medical facility with Emma, who had just gotten her stitches removed. The scar on her forehead was still red and angry-looking, but it would fade with time. Emma pressed closer to her father when she saw Vexthal approaching their sector. I don't want to see him, Daddy, she whispered. I know, sweetheart, but remember what we talked about. Sometimes we have to face the things that scare us. Vexthal stopped directly in front of them, his massive form blocking out the morning sun. Lieutenant Commander Morrison, I hear there has been some unusual activity in the refugee camps recently. Jake kept his voice steady. The refugees are adjusting well to their temporary housing. We've had no major incidents. No major incidents? Vexthal's mandibles clicked. Yet I have reports of unauthorized gatherings, discussions about Federation policies, and growing agitation among the displaced populations. People talk. It's natural for refugees to discuss their situation. Vexthal's eyes fixed on Emma, who was trying to hide behind her father. And how is the small primitive recovering from her accident? Jake felt his hands clench into fists. Emma is healing well, no thanks to you. I trust she has learned to watch where she runs in the future. Before Jake could respond, the elderly Zephyrian woman approached their group. She moved slowly but with purpose, her translator device hanging around her neck. When she reached them, she stopped and looked directly at Vexthal. You killed my brother, she said in perfect Federation standard, surprising everyone present. During the Kaleri uprising, you executed him after he surrendered. Vexthal turned to face her, his expression unreadable. I do not recall every primitive I have been forced to discipline during my service. His name was Kethril. He was a healer, not a fighter. He tried to help wounded soldiers from both sides of the conflict. If he was executed, it was because he was a threat to Federation security. The woman's voice grew stronger. He was trying to save lives. You killed him because he refused to tell you where the other healers were hiding. More refugees had begun to gather around them. Jake recognized several faces from the families he had shared information with. They were watching the confrontation with growing anger and determination. You should return to your shelter, Vexthal told the woman. Before you say something you regret, I regret nothing. I regret staying silent for so long while you continued to hurt innocent people. A younger Zephyrian male stepped forward. You killed my father on Proxima Delta. He was trying to protect the miners' children during the strike. Another voice joined them. You destroyed our village because we refused to relocate for your mining operation. My sister disappeared after, questioning you about her missing husband. The crowd grew larger as more refugee families came forward with their stories. Jake watched in amazement as people who had been silenced for years finally found their voices. The information he had shared with them had given them the courage to speak out. Against their oppressor, Vexthal's security detail moved closer, their weapons ready. The Federation commander's voice carried a warning tone. "This gathering is unauthorized. Return to your shelters immediately or face consequences." "What consequences?" the elderly woman asked. "Will you kill us like you killed our families? Will you hurt our children like you hurt this human child?" Emma stepped out from behind her father. Despite her fear, she walked toward the crowd of refugees who had become her friends. "He hit me because I bumped into him by accident. I was just playing." The refugees looked at the small human girl with her healing scar and saw their own lost children. Emma's courage in speaking out gave them strength to continue. "The child speaks truth," said another refugee. "We all saw what happened. There was no threat, no justification, only cruelty." Vexthal raised his weapon. "I will not tolerate this insubordination. Disperse immediately or I will use force." "Go ahead," Jake said, stepping forward to stand beside Emma. "Show everyone what kind of leader you really are. Attack unarmed refugees and children." Maria and the other human soldiers had arrived, drawn by the commotion. They formed a protective line between the refugees and Vexthal's security detail. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. "You cannot protect them all, human," Vexthal said. "When I am finished with my investigation, you will face charges for inciting rebellion among the refugee population." "Then investigate," Jake replied. "But you'll do it with the whole camp watching. No more secrets, no more cover-ups." The standoff continued for several minutes. Vexthal's security detail was outnumbered by the growing crowd of refugees and human soldiers. More importantly, they were surrounded by witnesses who were no longer afraid to speak out. Finally, Vexthal lowered his weapon. "This is not over, Morrison. The Federation will hear about this incident." "I'm counting on it," Jake said as Vexthal and his security detail withdrew. The refugees began to cheer. It was a sound that hadn't been heard in the camps for months. For the first time since arriving on Kepler 442b, they felt like they had some power over their own fate. Emma looked up at her father with pride. "You didn't let him scare you." "No, sweetheart. And more importantly, neither did you." The confrontation had changed everything. Word of the refugees' courage spread beyond the camps to other Federation installations across the planet. Other oppressed populations began asking questions about their own treatment and demanding answers about Federation policies. Maria pulled Jake aside as the crowd began to disperse. "Sir, you know this isn't over. Vexthal will be back with more forces and full authorization to restore order." "I know. But look around you. These people aren't victims anymore. They're citizens demanding justice." "The Federation won't see it that way. They'll see rebellion that needs to be crushed." Jake watched Emma talking with the Zephyrian children who had gathered around her. The fear was still there, but it was mixed with something else now. Determination, hope, the same expression he was seeing on the faces of the refugee families. "Then we'd better be ready for them," Jake said, "because I'm not letting them silence these people again." The uprising had begun not with violence or grand speeches, but with a simple act of courage. An injured child had found her voice, and in doing so had given thousands of others the strength to find theirs. The Federation's response would determine whether that courage could grow into something powerful enough to change the galaxy. That night, Jake held Emma close as she fell asleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and greater dangers, but tonight, he felt something he hadn't experienced since the attack. Hope. His daughter had faced her attacker and spoken her truth. The refugees had found their voices after years of silence. And somewhere in the darkness, the foundations of an unjust system were beginning to crack. The question now was whether that crack would spread wide, enough to bring down the walls that had protected oppressors like Vexthal for so long. Jake was determined to find out, whatever the cost. The old ethereal named Zethmer had lived for 3,000 years and ruled the coalition for half that time. He had seen wars that burned entire star systems and peace treaties that lasted centuries. but he had never seen anything like what the humans were doing. In his crystal chamber high above the Coalition capital world, he watched the reports flowing in from across the galaxy. Human supply ships were following their contracts exactly, but nothing more. Human colonies were polite but distant. Human technical support answered questions with perfect accuracy but offered no helpful suggestions. It was like watching a vast organism slowly withdraw from the galaxy. The supply disruptions were getting worse. The mining colony on Rigel 7 needed human-made atmospheric processors, but the delivery was delayed by what the humans called technical difficulties. The Manthari homeworld required human medical supplies, but the shipment sat in a warehouse. While human officials processed paperwork with painful slowness, 12 different worlds were experiencing the same pattern. The humans were not breaking any laws or treaties, but they were following them so strictly that everything ground to a halt. CS single quote, Moore called his council together. The Zephyrian representative. Karnak spoke first, and his voice carried frustration. The humans had become impossible to work with, and their behavior was affecting military operations across 3 sectors. The Manthari delegate Zakth clicked his mandibles in agreement. His people depended on human trade for several key resources, and the humans were making every transaction as difficult as possible within legal limits, but it was the Vortani counselor Chardon who spoke the truth that everyone else was avoiding. The humans were not just angry about one child being hurt. They were showing the galaxy what happened when you dismissed human concerns. They were demonstrating that their species was far more connected and organized than anyone had realized. Every human everywhere was participating in this response, and they were doing it without any visible coordination. The reports from the peacekeeping base made this clear. Commander Morrison had not given any obvious orders, but every human on the base was working together perfectly. They shared information instantly through subtle glances and tiny gestures that other species could not interpret. When one human learned something useful, somehow all the humans knew it within hours. They had become a single organism with thousands of eyes and hands. Dr. Sullivan had documented everything in her report. The assault on Lucy Bennett was not just an attack on one child, but an attack on human values. The Coalition's dismissal of the incident had been interpreted as a rejection of human worth. The humans were not seeking revenge, but justice, and they would not stop until they got it. Zethmar realized his mistake. The Coalition had treated humans like any other species that could be, managed through political pressure and cultural conditioning. But humans were different. They were pack hunters who had evolved to protect their young above all else. Threatening a human child was like threatening every human everywhere. The Coalition had poked a sleeping giant, and now the giant was awake. The decision to convene a new tribunal was unanimous. But this time it would be different. The trial would have full authority, and the evidence would be examined completely. More importantly, the humans would be given the respect they deserved as Coalition partners. The tribunal gathered in the Great Hall of the Coalition capital. Representatives from 30 different species sat in the curved amphitheater while the evidence was presented. The recordings of the assault were played, and the medical reports were read. Witness after witness described what they had seen. The Manthari warrior Zikth testified that the child had posed no threat and was simply playing. The Vortani diplomat Chardon confirmed that the human response had been measured and legal. Despite their obvious anger, Krext stood in the center of the hall, and his reptilian features showed no emotion. He maintained that he had acted according to proper military protocol and that the humans were overreacting. But the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings showed clearly that Lucy Bennett had been playing innocently when she was struck. The medical reports detailed injuries that could have killed a human child. The witnesses confirmed that Krext H had shown no remorse. Commander Morrison testified via quantum link from the peacekeeping base. He spoke simply about human values and why children were so important to his species. He explained that humans had evolved as social creatures who depended on protecting their young for survival. He described how the assault had affected not just Lucy, but every human who heard about it. His words were calm, but they carried the weight of an entire species. Behind them, the most powerful testimony came from Lucy herself. The 8-year-old girl appeared on the view screen from the medical bay where she was still recovering. Her face was bruised and her arm was in a cast, but her eyes were bright and clear. She spoke in the simple way that children do about what had happened to her. She said she had been playing and then someone had hurt her very badly. She said she did not understand why the person who hurt her was not sorry, but then Lucy surprised everyone. She said she hoped the person who hurt her would learn to be nice to children. She said maybe they could be friends someday if he learned to be good. Her words of forgiveness carried more power than any threat or demand for punishment. The tribunal reached its verdict quickly. Crext H was found guilty of assault and conduct unbecoming a coalition officer. He was stripped of all rank and sentenced to rehabilitation on a penal colony. But the real change was in the new protocols that the coalition established. Children of all species would be protected by special laws. Cultural sensitivity training would be mandatory for all peacekeeping forces. Most importantly, human values would be respected and incorporated into coalition policy. The human response began to change immediately. Supply ships started arriving on time again. Human colonies reopened their borders to alien visitors. Human technical support became helpful once more. The great organism that was humanity began to relax and return to normal cooperation. But the galaxy had learned something important. Humans were not just another species to be managed. They were partners whose protection of their young and commitment to justice made them formidable allies and dangerous enemies. The lesson had been taught and learned. Human children were now under the protection of the entire human species, and that protection had no limits. Commander Morrison received a final message from Earth Command as the crisis ended. The words were simple but carried deep meaning. Protocol 7 was successful. The galaxy had learned that human children were precious and that some lines must never be crossed again. The peacekeeping mission would continue, but now with genuine respect for what humans valued most: